how did life begin on this tiny little speck of dust that is suspended in a sunbeam? So let's look at this one. So life on Earth is quite amazing. There's whales, there's germs, there's trees and mushrooms and everything in between, kangaroos and cats and porcupines and whatever. The thing which combines all of us together, that connects us to, say, a cucumber or a strawberry or a tree or a marsupial, is, of course, our DNA. The DNA is just, of course, the plot, the instructions that you have inside you that tells you how to build you, which is kind of weird. It's the blueprint for all life. It is this wonderful thing that replicates itself from each generation. It's good to know that we all have DNA, but where does this DNA come from? How did the first DNA start? That's the question I want to go to next. So, answer is we don't know. Or in other words, we're not sure. We're like, I'm not sure. There's a few ideas, but it has happened about 4 billion years ago. It's kind of hard to find evidence for germs from 4 billion years ago, so we're trying to kind of understand. 2 main ideas at the moment, 2 of them. One of them is called the Primordial Soup. We talked about Earth when it was young, when the moon was closer, and everything was exploding, and there was fire, and there was lava, and there was meteors everywhere, and comets. One of the things that happened then is because of all these lightnings and chemical reactions that happened together in the boiling water, for millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, they've been mixing together, and there's a good chance that maybe somehow the first replicating molecule was formed. There was a very famous experiment called the Miller-Urey experiment, named after these 2 guys, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. They kind of try and simulate what's happening in the first early universe. So they took some water and they heated it up and they added some lightning bolts and some chemicals which were in the atmosphere and so on. And they created some basic building blocks of life in a petri dish, essentially. So they created not DNA, but the organic compounds, the things which build us, the carbon footprint of life was created in this. This was 1953, it's a while ago. It was very exciting for many, many years, but life is much more complicated than just organic compounds, which leads us to option number 2, Panspermia. Wonderful idea. It's weird, again, big word, but wonderful idea. Consider this. Organic compounds that the experiment found in a petri dish were found also on asteroids and Mars and comets, like this very catchy name, 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, which is if you've heard of Rosetta, the little spacecraft that just landed on a comet. This is it. This is the comet. They found this organic compound, which is really exciting, and in distant solar systems even. So what it tells us is these organic compounds are everywhere. There's life, potentially, maybe, everywhere, at least the building blocks of life, which is quite interesting. Then this happened. So 17 million years ago, there was a meteor that smashed into our good neighbor Mars. Made a big explosion, threw some rocks out into space. One of these rocks floated around for a few million years until eventually it got pulled by the gravity of Earth and ended up in Antarctica. That was landed about 13,000 years ago. Someone found it, and you know what they did? They gave it another catchy name, LH84001,0, which is, of course, not to be confused with 002. Yeah. This was put in a drawer for about 30 years, nobody looked at it. But then someone pulled it out, and they cut it open, and they looked with a microscope to see what is inside. You know what they found inside? They found this, or to be more specific, this, which is interesting, because it looks like, for the untrained eye, some sort of bacteria or germ or life of some sort, which is interesting. There's still debate going on whether this is a real sign of life. Are those fossilized bacteria which came on a comet from Mars to Earth? So maybe this idea of panspermia is that essentially life came on comets or on asteroids to Earth to start everything else. Can life survive? Can we even have life in space? Obviously, if you're having vacation plans and you want to go to space, make sure you have a spacesuit with you, because space is not a very good place for people or creatures of life, generally speaking. So we thought for many years that it's impossible. Nothing can survive in space until we found the extremophiles. Extremophiles are these creatures which can survive in many weird places, like the black smokers, which are 5 kilometers under the ocean, where the pressure is so insanely powerful and there's no sunlight at all, it's pitch dark. And all these gases from the bottom of the earth are climbing up and making everything die around them. But there's life there. Lots of it, in fact. There's crabs and there's tube worms and there's other kind of creatures. Life is pretty powerful when it comes to these weird conditions. And it's not just there. We found life in these chemical lakes, or Antarctica, or the Dead Sea, which is mistakenly called the Dead Sea. That's my son there standing on this sheet of salt. And it's so salty that no fish is living there, so it's called the Dead Sea. But in fact, there's bacteria living there. Yeah, that's him over there. Tar lakes, even in tar lakes, these are tar, there's a lake of tar, the thing you build roads with, life is there as well, bacteria as well, not, you don't find kangaroos jumping in that, but you have microbes. Life is very, very resilient. And then we get to these little fellas. These are the water bears, or in their scientific name, the tardigrades. They look weird. These are actual animals. They're tiny. They're just 1 millimeter long. And they live pretty much all over Earth, or in many, many places at least. They live in droplets of water, of the morning dew. They kind of come up, they eat the little thingies, and then they kind of go to sleep. They look weird. This is an actual picture with an electron microscope. They look bizarre. They look like aliens, but they're real. They're real creatures. The thing about them is we put them into really weird conditions. They can survive in anywhere between minus 200 to 150 degrees. They survive. They survive the vacuum of space. How do we know that? Because we actually sent a few of them to space. We put them in space. We came back 4 days later, and they're like, "Hey, dude, what's up?" They were cool with it. There was nothing, they lived. They lived about at least 120 years with no water at all. So we know these creatures are absolutely resilient. They can survive anything. They just kind of dry up. They go into kind of sleep mode, essentially. And then when you put a bit of water on them, they're like waking up as if nothing has happened, which is really weird. So, maybe we are all Martians. Maybe life did come from Mars. Or, maybe it did, maybe now we are returning them a favor. This is, of course, my personal favorite robot ever. This is the Mars Curiosity. Mars Curiosity is this wonderful, wonderful robot that has been exploring the red planet for the last couple of years. Mars, by the way, is the only planet we know of that the only inhabitants of the planet are robots. The only thing which actually live there are robots. We send this thing, you see all these, scientists with the white coats and they sterilize everything. In fact, in retrospective, we found out that while we sent this thing to space, there were at least 60 types of microbes living on it, staying on the robot. So when we send this rover to Mars, we actually may have introduced some germs or microbes or bacteria to Mars. Now, we don't know if they survived. We don't even know if they were there when they landed. But just imagine, you come back, in maybe 3 billion years from now, there will be a Martian saying, "Oh, I wonder how life on Mars started." And then somehow they'll trace it back to us. Maybe, just maybe. So we don't know. Maybe we brought life to Mars. The big question we're asking is the universe full of life? And everything we know about science seems to indicate that yes, the universe is massively huge. There are endless, essentially, number of planets and stars and solar systems. There are the building blocks of life which make us everywhere, but we haven't found them yet. Because we are kind of stuck in our little tiny speck of dust that is suspended in a sunbeam. We think there's a good chance that within the next few decades we will find some signs of life. Maybe even on Mars. There used to be water there and so on. It's quite interesting to see how this search goes on.